Okay, Bryce, could you tell us about how long that trip took, like when you left England and when you arrived in Karachi?
Well, uh, actually I left England on the 15th of August and arrived in Karachi on the 2nd of September.
So what were your impressions of Karachi then?
Well, it was a whole new world, you know, and Kid from the Prairies was doing a lot of gawking and things like that, but I was in company of other gawkers as well, so it was certainly different. And a funny thing happened the day that we were to leave from Karachi to go to Allahabad. The airfield was, you know, just out in the sand, and so I was following, I think, another fellow that from my course, and so he thought he was on the instructions from the tower, and so we were taxiing merrily along behind him. It turned out he'd gotten onto a road into Karachi. So anyway, when we discovered we were, or whether the tower called, "Where the hell are you?" we could leave the road and turn around and head back to the airfield. So eventually we made it. And so we arrived at Karachi, or at Allahabad, and there we were for some time waiting for something to happen, to be posted somewhere, hopefully to a squadron. Well, during that time, I couldn't sit still for very long, so I went down the flights and found that they were doing maintenance on Wellingtons, and they had some old Wellington 1Cs that had done trips out of Europe, out of the desert, and eventually sent to India. And talk about a clapped out aircraft, they were that. But anyway, I was keen to fly anything I could get my hands on. So I did several air tests there. And I remember one day, this one heaper, the airman who had done both the maintenance on it, he was sitting in the right-hand seat, and off we went. And the run-up didn't have a whole lot of power, but I said, "Aren't we going to get any more power than this?" And he said, "Well, that's about it. That's all you get." So anyway, we got off the ground at the end of the runway, and about 2 minutes later, or 3 minutes, or 4 or 5 maybe, we got to 1,000 feet, and so we were flying around, did a few things that you do on air tests, and then looked down at the river, and there were a whole bunch of sailboats down there. We thought, wouldn't it be fun to go down and fly over one of those and see whether they bail out as we approach or after we blow the boat over. And so we were starting into our descent, but God intervened, and all of a sudden there was a hell of a rip, and a piece of fabric tore off from behind the front turret, went right to the tail of the aircraft, and so we decided that maybe what I had in mind wasn't the smartest thing, so we went in and landed. But an interesting thing happened there. I had to ferry an airplane up to Delhi, and had to ride the train coming back, and stopped at a station called Fatehpur, and that I remember very clearly because there were a bunch of monkeys around the station, and when the train stopped and there were windows open in the train, things like that, well, these monkeys scrambled into all the carriages and stole all the fruit they could lay their hands on, and off they went. And amongst other things, I noticed a Canadian pilot on the you know, the station platform. So I went over and I said, "Hi, fella, where are you from?" He said, "You probably never heard of the place, Dayful, Saskatchewan." I said, "Are you Dave Blythe?" He said, "Yes, I am." So he said, "You must be Bryce Chase." We both had gone with Enid Harvey from Dayful, and it was kind of interesting. She was a lovely lady, and anyway, I persuaded him. This guy by this time was a hero in my view, because he completed a tour of ops on Hurricane fighter bombers, and he and the CO were the only two of the original squadron that survived to that point. The war wasn't over. And lo and behold, he was testing Hurricanes and Spitfires at Allahabad, and so I got to do the Wimpies. And so we had several chats. He was, by this time, a pilot officer. I was still a sergeant pilot. But a wonderful guy, and I'm so glad he survived. And he has an interesting story. He's since died, unfortunately. Anyway, while I was there, I started having some problems with breathing. And I went to the doctor, and he sent me off to a place called, I've forgotten the name of it, to have an operation. And after I had this polyps removed from my nose, I went to the hospital at Allahabad with the documents from this little surgery I'd had. Went into the administration room or something anyway with my stuff, and there were two RAF corporals there. And one of them was taking my stuff. The other fellow was looking on. As it turned out, he was to replace the chap doing my stuff for 2 weeks while that fellow went on leave. So partway through the conversation, the chap taking my stuff said, "Incidentally, this fellow's name is Chase." And did I not tell you about this? Anyway, so I said, "Oh, hi fellow, where are you from?" He said, "East Anglia." I said, "You wouldn't be from Bundy, Suffolk by any chance?" He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Well, do you know Herbert Chase and Phyllis and Betty?" He said, "Yes, they're cousins of mine." I said, "Well, shake hands with another." We'd never heard of each other. And interestingly, when my wife and I went to the last Burma Star reunion in London, we went up to Norwich and stayed with them. But Jeffrey Chase, or Godfrey Chase. Anyway, and just to think he was there on 2 weeks to just fill in. So anyway, eventually I got sent to Pune, which was a holding unit for aircrew. And it was there, by the time I got there, because I was late, the crew had gone ahead of me. Two of them, the rear gunner and wireless operator, had already been posted to a squadron. So I did a little more flying training there, and eventually, one day the Wellington pilots had turned in their logbooks, didn't know why, and they were looking for a test pilot to go to a maintenance unit. And lo and behold, I had this page of air tests, and so the next year was the dullest year of the war. I did a few air tests and ferried a few airplanes, but eventually, there was a little occasion when I was ferrying a Wellington, and I'd taken one up to Allahabad from a place called Bishnapur, where I was stationed at the time. It was a maintenance unit. And so I got into this Wimpy, and it was getting late in the day, and we didn't have lights back at Bishnapur. So I was kind of anxious to get going, and so I picked up a fellow who needed a ride down to Bishnapur. I forget why. But anyway, maybe he was ferrying airplanes too, but anyway. We were at the end of the runway, ready to take off from this place called Fafamau, I think it was, which was not far from Allahabad. And a Jeep came out, and I was sort of looking after the office, and this fellow went down to talk to the chap who'd come out. And the passenger turned to me and he said, "Have you got all the bump?" Which was all the paperwork that went with the aircraft. And I said, "Yes." But he missed a part of the transmission was go over to Allahabad and spend the night there, because there was no accommodation in this place, because it's too late to be heading for Bishnapur. But I didn't get that. So I've been watching my watch, and I thought, well, I can bend the throttles a little bit and get there on time, and we did. So the next day I was back in Allahabad with another airplane, and I was summoned to the OC of ferry flight and informed that I was going to be on charge for breach of a ferry regulation. So anyway, he said the paper will be sent down for your CO to look after it. So some days later, I was told that I would be on charge the following morning. Well, that night, the sergeants were invited to the officers' mess for a little celebration of some sort. And of course, I was the youngest person in the sergeant's mess, and I don't think there was anybody in that group that didn't get the CO by the ear and tell them, "Now, don't you be hard on our tame Canadian." So anyway, the next morning, I'm hat off, belt off, I marched in front of the CO, and there in his in basket facing me was my application for a commission. And so anyway, he heard me out, and I gave him my explanation, and he said, "Well, I guess we've got to give you something. Just consider yourself admonished." So chase luck again. If anything good was going to happen, it happened to me. So anyway, shortly after that, I got posted to a place called Kolar, down near Bangalore in the south of India, to check out on B-24s, Liberators. But anyway, I had left the base, just happened to have to overnight in Calcutta, and the other two pilots from the test flight arrived to say, "Hey, I guess you didn't hear it. We have to go to Barrackpore tomorrow for commissioning interviews." So off I went to Barrackpore, and I guess it must have been all right. They didn't tell me whether anything was going to happen or not, but I was interviewed. Then I caught a train to go south to Kolar, and during the night, it was a third-class carriage, no glass in the windows or anything like that, just shutters. And we passed through a place where there was an outbreak of like our grasshoppers, or they're only
Locusts?
Locusts.
Yeah.
And these things came through the shutters, and I mean, you hit the darn things were about this size, you know. And God, they just came and filled this carriage up with that. And anyway, there wasn't much sleep that night, although it was only about 10 miles wide that they were in, but boy, could they ever clean things out. You've seen what grasshoppers can do. Locusts can do it about 10 times as much. Anyway, so eventually got down and got onto this Liberator conversion course, and there was some ground school and things like that, and eventually we went flying. And everything went, I was apparently sent down just to get checked out. Well, I thought I'm going to escape, and I joined a crew. And our first night of night flying, Pete Shopping was in the left-hand seat. He didn't have a lot of recent flying experience, which was unfortunate. Anyway, he was in the seat, and we were getting a night flying check. And it was interesting because as we drove out the back of a truck to the airfield, I said to Pete, Pete, I've got the darndest feeling. I got the feeling there would be better things for us to do than go flying tonight. He says, isn't that funny? He said, I have the same feeling. Well, the first time around, couldn't get lined up with the runway. It was a single runway, and there was a serious crosswind. And Pete just couldn't get lined up. So overshot, came around the second time. This time we got lined up and was able to pick a heading that would hold us. But forgot about the glide path. So I'm standing between the two pilots, instructor on the right-hand side and me, and there was some armor plate behind the two seats, but there was a place for me to hang on so I could watch what was going. And they got low on the glide path, and I said, fellas, you're too low. Fellas, you're getting far too low. Power, pull up. But I was a little too late. We hit the deck about, 200 yards short of the runway, and went on fire, and when I picked myself up, I was back in the bomb bays. Anyway, I got back to the crew compartment and managed to get the hatch. The hatch in that airplane, the top hatch, the escape hatch, had dropped down on us. It was a two-stage hatch. It had come down 3 or 4 times during the flight, and I banged the darn thing up. And you know what? When the aircraft buckled a bit, I was able to get hold of that hatch and pulled it down and got it open. And I was the third person out. And of the 5 of us, 3 of us left a shoe behind. Our shoes couldn't keep up with our zeal to escape. So anyway, everything was fine. 4 of us got out, and then Pete, who was the last who'd been at the controls, he came over the side, and the flames had gotten to him, and he passed out coming over the side, and a couple of us went back and got hold of him, and we took some awful skin off him, I guess, as we pulled him out of the flames.
Did it catch fire fairly quickly then?
Instantly.
Instantly, okay.
Yeah, and we had 2,200 gallons of gas on board in rubber fuel cells, and every now and again there'd be a and some more gas would come out, so it was quite impressive. Anyway.
How did he fare in the end?
He survived. There were just the 2 of us had to go to hospital, Pete and I.
You also had burns.
Yes, but not, I didn't, my eyebrows came back after a time, and I did need a haircut for a while. And, but.
Sorry, would you mind asking, like, where did you get burned? Like in your hands or your
face and left arm. And now even the scars have gone. I have nothing to show for it. But anyway, so after a couple of weeks in hospital, and poor old Pete, his face was so burned that he had to eat with a straw. His mouth was just. Eventually, they got it opened up, and I wrote his parents for him several times because his hands were burned. Anyway. We got back, after a couple of weeks, I got back to the airfield, and the rule was in flying, if you'd been in a crash, you wanted to get back airborne as quickly as you could. Well, I couldn't get into a lib, although I checked out on it. So they had an old Anson that was parked, and I never saw it fly until I went over one day, and I said, hey, told her what the story was, and I wanted to get airborne, and I'd flown a couple of wings on them. So they said, yeah, you can fly it. So they did a daily inspection on it, and away I went. I learned after I brought it back that it didn't fly again because termites had gotten into the main spar, and they didn't think that it was a good airplane to let fly again. So that's what I was told. This may be Blarney, but that's what I was told. And it made it more attractive, you know, the story. So anyway, so eventually they sent me back to the aircrew holding unit at Pune instead of back to my unit. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't even know for sure why I was down there. I was suspicious of the fact it was just for a checkout, but I wanted to get on the squadron. So anyway, back to Pune, did some more flying, and I had a cousin from Northern Ireland who was stationed in India with a tank transporter squadron. They moved tanks around the countryside, and by golly, I found out where he was, and he wasn't far from Pune. It was about 18 miles. So I got on my bicycle and rode out there one day, and he was corporal. Now the Brit forces were very, Army particularly, I was a sergeant. This presented a problem because I had to eat in the sergeant's mess, and I was just there for the day. Anyway, when I came back the next time to Pune, I'd been commissioned. And that was kind of funny too, because it was while I was on the conversion course. I used to write and receive between 60 and 80 letters a month. They were just these airgraphs and things like that. But we were raised a family of writers, and so this happened. Well, I stopped getting mail. And one day down on the flight, one of the chaps came along and said, "Hey, there's some mail for you at the officers' mess. Come around at 5 o'clock tonight and I'll get it for you." So I'm standing outside the officers' mess, which was a tent, and waiting, and a Canadian bomber comes out, and brand new to India, and I'm a W01 by this time, and this bass plug accuses me of loitering around the officers' mess. Anyway, I told him why I was there, and I thought, what kind of a character is this due to, another Canadian? Anyway, out came the mail, and lo and behold, I'd been commissioned. They scratched out warrant officer EV chase and put in pilot officer, and so that's how I found out I'd been commissioned. So anyway, the next time I went to Pune, I was an officer. So I got in touch with my cousin, and he came to the base. So I suggested, he was still a corporal, and I said, well, we've got to get some food here. I've got a couple of uniforms, put one of mine on. And well, he demurred at that. That was a little much. So our bearer went over and got us 2 meals and brought the tent where I was president. So that was kind of interesting. Anyway, from there, I went back to my unit at Bishnapur to the test flight, and I tested some more Wimpeys, and we had some Volley Vengeance dive bombers there, and I'd always wanted to fly one of those. So I did a couple of rides in the back seat to sort of get used to the feel of the thing, and then I got into one to go and fly it. These cars could no controls of the thing, so you just rode around to look, see what was happening. So off I started, the brakes failed. I just about rode off some parachutes that were on the ground when the thing ground looped. Anyway, there was another one there, and it turned out to be serviceable enough, so off I went. They said you couldn't bounce Volley Vengeance. I proved that wrong, but anyway, it got around and down. And I also wanted to fly a bullfighter. So I did 2 trips in the back of the bullfighter, watching, and I read the book and things like that. But I never did get to fly one, although there's the authorization to do so in my logbook. Anyhow, I ferried a few Liberators, And eventually they sent me off to do a course on Dakotas. And so I went and checked out on Dakotas, and then I got posted to #1 airborne salvage section, which became, well, as a matter of fact, by that time it might have been 85 repair and servicing unit. And our job was to salvage aircraft. And that's where we had a Dakota that you could sling a Dakota wing underneath. The root end of the wing first, and it had a fairing that went over it. We had 2 glider releases, one front, one at the back, and they were fastened on to, there was a fitting that went on the wing to fasten these 2. And then there were jacks under the aircraft that you screwed down until they were tightened, and so that the thing wouldn't vibrate. And you could also pull a glider release if you got into trouble and get rid of them. And then we had another one, we could carry a Spitfire wing, a Hurricane wing, and big single engine, rotary engine aircraft anyway.
So you weren't carrying the whole aircraft, just the
No,
wing
just a wing.
as a spare part?
And with a Spitfire, we could get a Spitfire fuselage with the prop on and the wings off. We could get the fuselage with the engine in it inside the Dakota. They had to take the stern frame off, but and the guns out and things, they could put alongside. So we could take a Spit, bar one wing, and
Would that have been put upside down then, so the cockpit's downwards?
No. They just, we had a sort of a 2x8 frame, just a simple frame that the air thing was on, and then we would jack it up to the front of the aircraft so that the C of G was all right, and it worked just fine, and we salvaged quite a few aircraft that way. But,
And these aircraft, they would be a variety of engine or problems, or were any shot down, or any or crashes? Or?
They were mostly crashed aircraft, and they were just salvaging what they could.
So you were on recovery missions and bringing back parts that could be
That's
salvaged?
right. Yeah, that's right. And but once the war started to slow down in Europe, then we went out of the salvage business and into straight transport to supply the troops in Burma. And 90% of all the arms and things that were used in Burma went in by air. And it was quite an exciting thing, because the Army would capture a bit of ground, some engineers be behind them, and with bulldozers, and they'd make a strip. And the next day we might have 400 or 500 airplanes land on it. And it was really quite exciting.
Can I clarify about when you're on your salvage runs? Is that mainly in India, or are you going into Burma?
All stuff in Burma.
So you are actually flying into Burma to pick up these aircraft. So
That's right.
Are they all at these temporary airfields?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And then at that time, you're an RCAF flying officer or pilot officer.
Yeah.
But you're flying with all RAF squadrons at this time?
Well, we were in support of 230 group was the maintenance group, and we were part of the maintenance group that were involved in supplying the maintenance units within that group.
Right, but
And
when
so
that
we
would
had,
have been,
so we had detachments all over the place, and some of them went into.
and that would be obviously an RAF
Oh, yes.
organization.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. So,
How many Canadians were you with?
in 2 or 3 units, I was the only Canadian, and but there were a tremendous number of Canadians out there. There were a couple of RAF Liberator squadrons that were more Canadian than RAF, because they were training here in Canada, and they were flying straight out there and going into operations. And late on, in late '44, the two Canadian transport squadrons, 435 and 436, were formed, and they went on ops out there and did an awfully good job. 413, a Canso squadron, a Coastal Command squadron, was in Ceylon much earlier on, and it was a Catalina flown by, or a Canso flown by Savior of Ceylon. Anyway.
I know who you mean.
Leonard Burchell.
Burchell.
Yeah.
Yes, Burchell.
He was flying out of Ceylon and discovered this Japanese task force heading for Ceylon, and got shot down in the process. Did a wonderful job. What a guy.
Did you meet him?
Yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, I was at a dinner a couple of years ago. His wife was here, and we've corresponded a couple of times. But he did a wonderful job.
So could you just kind of review what types of operations you're flying when you're in the transport then? Like, are there supplies or
Yes.
troops or wounded, or
Yes.
can you maybe give a
Well,
couple
there was
examples?
a little of everything. There, mostly we flew in supplies for the maintenance units in 230 Group, the advanced units that followed the troops down and had detachments with the squadrons. And there were motor transport organizations, for instance. I might have had a load of engines for Ford trucks or something like that. Or I might have had a couple of Merlin engines for a Hurricane squadron or a Spitz squadron. And then they gave us a bit of leeway so we could do a few things. So one day I was at a unit, and an Army captain came along and said, he said, I wonder if you could help me. So I said, what have you got in mind? He said, well, he said, we've got an Indian trooper who's got some shrapnel on his brain at a place where the fighting's going on about 50 miles south of here, and there's an airfield close by, in a gravel strip, and we could get him to this strip if you could see where he's clear to fly down, pick him up, and then drop him off at Camilla in India, where there's a military hospital. And so I said, sure. So he said, it's a little busy down there, but he said if Japs start giving you a little trouble, he said, we'll try and keep your heads down because the airfield's pretty close to where it's going on. So I said, fair enough. But I had some passengers, so I got rid of all my passengers and took one crew person, and off we went, and we picked this Indian soldier up and came back and to pick up the other people that I had to take back to India. And the interesting little thing happened there. I'd picked up the passengers, and there must have been 7 or 8 airplanes in a string just waiting to take off, and we usually landed one way and took off the other if there wasn't, much of a wind. So anyway, while I was in this string, an American aircraft, Dakota, came in, and the guy landed far too far down the runway, and he was bumping and bouncing, and he wasn't under full control when he hit the end of the runway, and there were aircraft lined up like this, and so he got it swung away so he wouldn't hit the guys that were first in the line, but he was coming straight for me. So I swung my airplane so he'd have to eat the wing before he got the fuselage. And happily, some bright guy behind me saw what was going on, and he gunned his aircraft and got out of the way and left a little space, and this American laddie went through behind us, piled up on some dirt that had been scraped up, when they built the runway. But anyway, we dropped the Indian soldier off at Camilla, and he was still alive, so that was kind of a good thing.
Did you have a sense or feel that you were being like fired on, or could you see any enemy or even of your own
Never
troops?
saw a thing, but I didn't shut the engines off, and I didn't spend too much time hanging around there either. But it worked fine. But, what else? When the monsoon started, then we really started to have some interesting flying conditions. Because boy, those tropical storms are really something. And there were a fair number of airplanes lost, but we'd been there and we got some experience. And you learned that if you got stuck in a thunderstorm, in a thundercloud, that you throttled back and just kept the wings level and just, you know. And apart from the time when I saw this one idiot fly into a cloud and saw the wing, just the wing, which I don't think was attached to the aircraft, pop out of the top of the cloud and then fall back in. But as I mentioned, that the Americans lost quite a few airplanes.
You could talk about, I was gonna ask you next, you were talking about the different ways of navigation and
Yeah.
that, and how the Americans, I was gonna ask you, so what did you see the difference between your type of flying, saying what the Americans were doing and how they navigated in that?
Well, I gotta be careful what I say about this because there's a lot of ignorance involved, but.
Well, your perspective on it.
But there were some times, stories of two or three squadrons of American fortresses having bombed in France, heading back for England, missed England, and were flying out over the Atlantic, and they sent a Spitfire to lead them back to England. And they depended very heavily on the radio compass, and the radio compass was great if the sky was blue and there were no storms around, because you tuned in the station, hit the needle pointed at the base you were going to, and you just followed it in. However, if there were thunderstorms, you could still pick up the identification for the station, but when you switch the needle on, it might point it at the thunderstorm. And I think they lost a lot of guys because they just flew into these things. And these storms were pretty rough. I blundered into one night at, I was about 13,000, about 13,000 feet, and the next thing I knew, I was at 17,000 feet, and everything was, and with the throttles closed, and so I said to the navigator, you watch the other stuff, I'm gonna have my nose glued on the artificial horizon, because you had to keep, you kept the wings level and things like that, and you got your speed back a bit. It took some of the stress off the aircraft, and it worked.
The Americans were trained for daylight raids. Was that part of the problem? Was that limited training?
I don't think they got the navigation training that we did.
Yeah, I was going to ask you whether one of the differences you saw was your navigators. How did they operate so slightly differently then?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I was lucky, but our navigators were really good, and our guys could map read really well. And we depended a lot on that, whereas they might have stooged around, turned the radio on, you could listen to somebody singing, and it would, you just homed in on it. And then you could do your instrument landing off the end of it.
Did you
I have to be a bit careful what I say, but some of the stories of, one night I got in, and the American ops officer said, well, we sent 17 out and didn't get anybody back.
Can you describe
on lightning flashes?
Can you describe that story? Because we don't have that one on camera. When you're riding in the storm and you're trying to get in there and they're telling you not to come in?
Well, yeah, we were coming back from Burma. We let down through breaks once we got over the Chin Hills, and we're back over the flat country, which was eastern India. And so there were thunderstorms all around us. Mercifully, apart from the odd shower, we didn't hit any heavy rain, because boy, when that rain came down, I'll tell you didn't see much. But anyway, it was good, and Doug King, I think, was my navigator that night, and he was the best navigator I ever flew with. He was just wonderful. And they were all good, but some were better, and particularly map reading. So we were heading for Barrackpore, and I called the tower and for landing instructions, and the operator said, well, the airfield's closed, there are thunderstorms all around. And his transmissions were breaking up pretty badly, but I got that message, and he said, you better go somewhere else. Well, I didn't have gas enough to go anywhere else, because one load of gas would take us into Burma and home if you managed it properly. So anyway, we kept soldiering on, and actually I took my headset off. I didn't want to hear any more of that stuff, for fear he might hear something I really didn't. I knew I was going to do. And I was just going to put it on when we got close, if necessary, if the lights weren't on the airfield. So anyway, we came in, and the next morning, I was running this particular unit, so I was down with a bunch of flight plans. We had filed flight plans for aircraft, even though we were going on operational trips. And the ops officer said, are you the guy that got in last night? And I said, yes. He said, what was it like? I said, well, it was pretty busy. And he said, and I told him, I said, you know, the guy tried to divert me somewhere else, but I didn't have enough gas to go anywhere else, so we just came in. And he said, well, we sent 17 airplanes out, we didn't get any back. And whether some of these flew into these storms, and the turbulence, you could, if you lost your artificial horizon, you were in deep trouble. You could do a thing called needle ball and airspeed, but there was nothing like having a horizon. So as soon as we hit tough stuff, I would give some instructions to whoever was with me to just keep an eye on altitude and other things. And I put my nose on the artificial horizon, and it worked. It worked.
Did you have much fear of going, or do you remember if you had much fear or anxiety about going, having to crash land, say in Burma, and you got mountains and jungle, and like, do you remember thinking about that much?
Well, we thought about it a bit, and usually we had some rudimentary safety gear, but not much really.
Did you carry like a revolver or a weapon?
I don't think we even had parachutes. Yes, we did. We did, because I know one time when I lost my hydraulics, I was going to tie one on the side of the airplane, so when we landed, we could pull a parachute to slow us down.
Great.
But we didn't do that. And that was probably a mistake, because I probably would have got a great rate up on that. But then it would have gone to my head, you know, and instead of this very quiet sort of, anyway, enough of that.
Do you remember whether you would have carried like a like a card that might have been written in a number of languages?
Oh, yes, a ghoulie chit.
Can you repeat that again?
A ghoulie chit?
Okay, could you explain what that is?
Well, a ghoulie is for testicles, and that was to prevent, if you came down in Arab countries, they had a little trick of removing them and putting in your mouth and sewing them up. And it was to encourage, and the ghoulie chit said, if you deliver him intact, you'll get a reward. So that was to prevent that sort of thing.
Okay, so can I clarify, is that on your flight out to India?
Yes.
Yes, okay. When you're flying over Burma, do you remember whether you had a similar kind of, you take this card and rescue this person and you'll get a reward?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Do you remember whether you carried like knives or handguns or anything like that with you?
I think I had a 38 at one time, which you had to keep away from the compass and things like that. Yeah.
Did you ever see any Japanese aircraft?
Only crashed ones.
Oh, okay.
And as far as Japanese, I smelled a few dead ones. And I did see some on the ground off the end of a strip near Shuibo. It wasn't Shuibo, it was another airfield, but within about 10 miles, not all that far from Mandalay. And this little crew of Japanese were set up at the end, just off the end of this runway, reporting all their arrivals and takeoffs. And it was really funny. I came back the next day. I did 2 trips into this place. Singapore, I think, was the name of the airfield. And somebody said, "Did you hear about our raid last night?" "No. What happened?" "Well, our little patrol ran into some Japs just off the end of the runway. And some of the Indian anti-aircraft gunners got a little excited, and they lowered their guns, and there was some anti-aircraft flying pretty close to ground." But, truth, I don't know. One funny thing I do remember, a place called Moniwa. I poured myself a glass of water out of a chatty, an earthenware, and I looked, and there was a small fish swimming in it. Oh, there.
I want to go back to something that you just said a minute ago about that you had smelled plenty of Japanese.
Not plenty, just on one occasion.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
was that like you're in the airplane from the ground, or you're on the ground,
I
or?
was on the ground. I was on the ground. It was somewhere nearby.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like at one
We
of
were
your
just unloading the
strips?
aircraft, and I guess
Oh,
that San
okay.
Luis had perished rather closely.
Oh, okay. So do you remember supporting any specific operations, like when General Slim goes back into Burma and they're going down
Well,
towards Mandalay?
Yeah, we
and-
followed the troops all the way down. Everything we did was in support of that.
Okay.
And we started up not far from, in the Infall Valley, well, just out of the Infall Valley, Tamu and Columbia, I think.
Would you have ever done any drops over Kohima?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I
and,
didn't do any drops at all,
Yeah,
because at that point, and our unit never did any.
okay. So you're always landing on these airfields?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you comment on the types of surfaces that they were using on those temporary airfields? You mentioned
Well, the dirt, it might be gravel.
that. Okay. Did they ever use the metal ones?
Yes, Pierce Plank. The airfield where I checked out on Dakotas, which was back in India,
Oh,
was a metal field. And they used the metal to a degree for hard stands, to put stuff on so it didn't sink, especially when the monsoon got going.
do you ever remember hearing of a surface that was like a jute with kind of a tar stuff
yeah,
on it?
and I knew the people who manufactured it, because when I was at Barrack Corps, what was the name of the forgotten the towns sort of almost joined each other, but anyway, there was a jute mill, and they manufactured this stuff. And I think I may have mentioned it to you on the phone, did I?
Yes, and that's what I was-
Yeah, and they put asphalt into this stuff, liquid asphalt, and they rolled it up and they put it out on the roads, and it held them for some time, keep them from getting wet and deteriorating. And how extensively it was used, I'm not sure, but it was an interesting intervention. And I know that the output from this jute plant, most of, at one stage, all went into that sort of thing.
When you're flying, do you ever recall, did you actually able to see any of your own troops or soldiers, or are they all hidden in the jungle, or this is over Burma?
Yeah.
Over Burma?
No, I never did. I never did, and for the most part, we were operating, behind the lines.
Yep.
Yep.
Um,
No, my career was pretty tame in that respect.
Was there any particular strategies or what I'm thinking of here is like strategies you used like in relation to like elevations that you flew to
Oh, yes.
avoid Japanese or
Yeah.
avoid
Well,
mountains
what
or?
we did was, as soon as we got over the Chin Hills, into Burma, we got right down on the deck, so that, you flew 200 feet or less.
Oh, no.
And because the aircraft were camouflaged, and they'd be pretty hard to see against the ground. Oh, I do remember seeing 2 or 3 American airplanes up at 2,000 feet, and the guys were obviously trying to find their way. But we learned some of the places we went to quite often, and we map read on vertical things and old volcanoes and things like that were there, and and it became very good. But our navigators got really good at this.
And about what speeds are you flying those aircraft
About
at?
130, 135 miles an hour.
Were you going into the same airfields each time so that you became familiar with them?
Well, there was a series of them all the way down, and so I went into Montauk probably 8 or 10 times. I did, there were several others. I could maybe find the names of some of them, but, and there's something here. A place like Mactilla was a place we went to quite a few times. And eventually we were flying into Mingladon, which was the airfield at Rangoon.
Oh. So you actually flew into Rangoon?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any, I know it's a long time ago, do you remember having any impressions of flying into Rangoon?
Well, I remember the airfield was sort of on a bit of a plateau. And I've forgotten I guess it was the Irrawaddy River running down. And I do remember one time going in, and there was a mosquito wrecked just on the approach to it, and he'd flown into the bank. And I guess there'd been a very strong wind down the runway, and then subsidence, and the runway was short, so he was trying to land right on the end, and he probably let his airspeed get down too far, and he pranged into the side, and that was curtains, unfortunately.
Can you remember too much about your living conditions and maybe like are you in tents and are there insects and snakes and that?
In some places it was pretty good. We were in barracks of sorts at Barkpore. I won't forget our second night in no, it'll be about the third night in Karachi. The quarters they'd put it into were infested with bed bugs. So after 2 nights of bed bugs, we found a tent, and so we moved into the tent. But every charpoy, which is what we called our cots, they're string cots, we had to have a stick on each corner to put our mosquito net. Well, unfortunately, when we went into this tent, we didn't have enough sticks to support each, mosquito net over each one. So we tied the mosquito nets together, and the first night in there, a damn camel came into the thing, and came in at there was a cot here, a cot here, and a cot here, and the damn camel came in, and its hump caught the string on the first one, and somebody woke up with a yip, and the camel couldn't back out. It went around the things, and when it eventually left the tent, it had all the mosquito nets. But for the most part, tents were probably the best thing. But some of the places were quite habitable. We had pretty good, actually, comparatively speaking. In fact, most of them we even had bearers, servants. I can remember it seemed to me to cost more to put uniforms on them than to pay them. But in any event, I think they didn't cost us more than $4 or $5 a month.
Would they be mainly Indian?
Yes.
Yeah, mainly
Yeah,
Indian, yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Somehow or another, if they were lucky, they looked after 2 or 3 of us, and they'd have enough to keep their families going.
Did you ever meet any of the Burmese cultures? Like there's many cultures, Kachins and
Not
different
very
ones.
much, but there was a place at, I think it was near Manawa, where there was a Buddhist village nearby. And I visited there because I bought a white sapphire from somebody and brought it home, and it turned out to be my sister's birthstone. So she immediately got it, and she married an impoverished Anglican minister, and it was in the engagement ring. So that was, he'd been an aeronautical engineer with Avey Rowe, I think, when they were building the 105, and when that went down the drain, he became an Anglican minister. Switch. Heck, a nice guy.
You mentioned that you served with, that you knew Burchell, you'd met Burchell. Did you meet any other noted
I only met
Canadians?
him way after.
Oh, after the war? Did you
Yes.
meet anyone during your time then that would later on became notable, or you would say, were you?
Not really.
No?
Not
Yeah.
really.
Were you serving most of the time with Canadians or other
Well,
nationalities?
during the war, entirely with Brits. Occasionally there'd be 2 or 3 Canadians in an organization, and this last one, the 85 RNSU, which I ran for several months. Interestingly, the chap I replaced was a Canadian, and the chap who replaced me was a Canadian.
Could you give a reference to that the book? Is this related to the book
Yes, I think
the
the
bamboo?
bamboo, what did I call it, bamboo? Oh dear.
That's all right. So there's a book you might have donated to the
Is that
museum
it?
here.
Might have,
You
because I
have.
can't find it at home, so I
Yes.
think I
So-
must have.
Bamboo workshops.
Bamboo workshops, yeah.
And so what was that? What do you think that book, or what does it describe?
Well,
Like,
it
so-
describes all the maintenance units, that RAF maintenance units that served in India, Burma. Yeah.
So is there any any other memorable flights? You seem to have quite a few, you seem to be able to draw on quite a few memorable flights. Is there anyone that we've maybe missed that stands out in your time in Burma?
Oh, yeah, not really, although I remember one time going into a place called Sedong, flying stuff from the Imphal Valley to Sedong, and and it was one time must have been during the migration of some birds. And I think I counted 50 bird strikes on the aircraft after it. They were just tiny birds. It was such a shame. But we were down flying close to ground, for our own benefit. And I didn't notice it later on. Once I had a hawk come through the windshield of a C-119. That was in peacetime. That was rather interesting. But they didn't affect much out there. Oh, the vultures, I remember at Kanpur though, they were tremendous. There was a slaughterhouse not very far from the airfield. And I found out that what looked like an extension on the wall around it was actually vultures shoulder to shoulder
Oh.
that picked up things. And but with vultures, you had to watch because you knew that they would dive every time, and the ones you worried about were the ones that were above you that were diving. And we had some fairly close ones at times.
Do you remember your perspective at the time on the Japanese as an enemy, or were any thoughts or anything about that?
Not really. I just remember hoping fervently we wouldn't come to grief because they were pretty good at lopping heads off. And that happened to a lot of chaps.
And you don't ever remember, like, you never got malaria then, or any of some of the
You know,
tropical
I
diseases?
didn't. I don't think there was anybody healthier than me, and I think part of it was that I reinforced my constitution with a certain amount of alcohol. And not that I drank a hell of a lot, but I had my share, and
So what was the favorite, I'm not gonna say, but in India, what was the favorite drink? Was there?
probably gin and lime,
Yeah, yeah.
or scotch. Scotch and soda, if we could get scotch, that was best, and, you know, I used to swear if the mosquitoes hit you, they'd just fall over, because, you know, they couldn't cope with.